It's a great pleasure to welcome Synthesis to the 2021 Cloud Conference, and a great pleasure to welcome Darryl Govender, who's the head of cloud services at Synthesis. We're going to be talking about achieving that next generation innovation through a cloud center of excellence. So much talk about cloud centers and using the cloud effectively and efficiently to really rationalize business value from the cloud. And I guess that there's a lot of intelligence and metrics that need to be adapted to see what your cloud adoption journey is going to be like. And there's all sorts of other things that come into it: cost savings and operational resilience, staff productivity, business agility. So Darryl, I'm looking forward to chatting to you. How are you firstly? How's 2021 treated you so far?
Thanks, Saki. Yeah, I think it's been a tough and very busy period for everyone. I think everyone can relate with that. Also, the working from home experience that we're all trying to get on top of. I think that's been very difficult for teams. But what I'm glad about, I mean, there's some positives here, is where organizations were typically afraid of working from home and finding the right kind of balance, we've been thrown in the deep end. So we've had
Yes.
to figure it out. I think it's been a good outcome around how companies have tried to work through finding that balance. Is it remote first? Is it on-site? Is it that right hybrid kind of solution? I know at Synthesis we're looking for that hybrid type of solution. So there've been some good outcomes off the back of that.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I think doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff, Darryl. Well, listen, I guess we're all still, learning a lot about what our capabilities are in the cloud, and the hybrid model is going to work or is it not going to work the efficiency of the vaccine is going deeper and deeper into populations. I think people are starting to become more comfortable with going back to the office and adopting that hybrid model, but I think we still have a long way to go. I touched on earlier about the Cloud Center of Excellence. What exactly is the Cloud Center of Excellence, and how does it help customers innovate?
I think a long story short, and we'll dig into it a little bit over the conversation, is it's a function that really enables the adoption of cloud at scale, at speed, sustainably, etc., in an organization. And if you look at it from a kind of standardized definition perspective, it's really about institutionalizing that best practice. So everything from governance, security, cost standards, and the like, engineering standards, of course, automation, as we see a lot from a cloud perspective, but it's really then driving, of course, the change. And we'll see how that ties back to people, the change in an organization and how to utilize the cloud. So, and I think I want to drill home that point in particular. At Synthesis, we've often talked about how cloud is actually a people construct. It's all about
Yes.
your people. And a lot of organizations, whether they realize it or not, you've got the people in your organization to begin the journey, to go on the journey. And then it's about how do you accelerate that. So we talk about the cultural shift, and we talk about change being the only real constant. That change is normal kind of mindset. And our CCOE helps you to determine and define that.
Yeah, it's so interesting you talk about the people and the culture. I mean, that really appears to be one of the biggest obstacles with any kind of change, especially when it comes to technological change and the adoption that everyone is going through. But
Yep.
when you look at it, Daryl, it really comes down to business agility, right?
Yep.
And when you look at business agility, I'd love you to expand on that specific point because I raised it earlier. And I guess agility is the key here.
It is, absolutely. And it happens to also be the most nebulous thing in the world, most abstract concept that companies come across. So I think when we talk about the benefits and unpacking them, we talked about cost savings. I think that's a more immediate and obvious one. I think everyone understands. Uh, Cloud is a pay-per-use model. So you don't have a provision, you pay for what you use, you can pay just in time. There's lots of good, interesting models to do that gets away
Right.
from the old school way of doing it through capital expenditure. The other piece is operational resilience. So as an example, customers, whether they're running a data center underneath their desk, it's in the broom closet, or they have a proper solution where it's multi-sites using local providers, etc., those types of things, utilizing the cloud for operational resilience, they've got it out the box. I mean, as an example, our South African AWS region, it's got three what AWS term is availability zones, which is multiple data centers geographically dispersed to create that resilience. So you've got it out the box. You don't have to solve it. No horsepower required, which leads to the next piece. Your actual staff, and in terms of their productivity, they don't have to expend horsepower and time and capacity trying to figure these things out. The cloud providers, the hyperscalers have figured it out for you. So whether it's to talk about operational resilience in the way the data centers are created, the regions are created, or it's about that service, the toolbox that you get access to, the connectivity of the toolbox, the ease of access, the training, the plethora of actual training material, whether it's certification, whether it's blog posts, whether it's actually the documentation on their websites. There's just a whole lot to actually increase that staff productivity. And I think that then bleeds into the agility piece, because we take all of those pieces and then you talk about how that can, and the last piece I think is really being able to freely experiment a lot quicker. So we have this concept of fail fast, fail forward, which really talks about you can do a lot more experiments, you can test a lot more things. So, gone are the days where you had to go and provision infrastructure, provision services, wait for months on end for it to happen, then realize your experiment actually doesn't work. And then you're left with, well, what do I do with all of this hardware I've procured, or these services that I've procured, or these people that I've hired, etc. Those types of things. You can actually go and test this in an afternoon through, or a week or a month, to POC and MVP whether something can work for you. And that whole concept of failing fast and failing forward, i.e., learning from the failure, taking the learnings and repurposing to try different things, I think that really starts to bring that whole organizational business agility into focus. You can go to market faster with new services and new products. You can test them in a variety of ways, but you've got more option to do so, which I think is quite key.
No, it's important. It's incredible how the world has changed and how agile we've become with technology today. When you touched on the cloud center of excellence, when you look at the customer base, is that something that every customer should have? Should every customer have this cloud center of excellence we talk about?
It's a good question. I mean, depending on the size of the organization, industry, or tier, I think everyone should have a function that speaks about the enablement that a CCOE can give you. So we can unpack as well what a CCO could look like and how you would start on that type of journey. But I think that function, and if you come back to the shorthand definition that speaks about a CCOE being there to accelerate, to enable, to catalyze the business in its utilization of the cloud, I think that function must exist in some way, shape, or form. So whether it's a partial allocation with one guy and a four-man team to make sure that all of those pieces are being adhered to, and there's somebody who can actually speak to that standardization in the organization, or if it's a multi-team kind of approach, spanning 50 different people who are dedicated to just managing the cloud for a business. It really depends on the business itself. But the function, creating the function, I think is quite key, and I think everyone should have some kind of view or implementation of that function.
Yeah. Darryl, you mentioned earlier that the size of the business would kind of determine that. Now, how would you go about setting up the center of excellence? And I suppose it also varies by industry and by tier, right?
It does. So if you look at it, if we start to unpack what a CCOE can be, the first building block is really to establish what we would term a business office, and then also the engineering capability. So we're immediately trying to marry business and technology consideration to make sense for the business. So as an example, from a business office perspective, that's obviously speaking about the training and readiness of your staff. So how you actually enable your guys to learn to utilize the cloud, the financial implication, the security and governance implication, data, of course, and privacy, etc. Regulation following those types of things are quite key in that business office. So you need somebody who can actually talk through those different types of capabilities, or having those roles, dedicated roles that can actually form that as part of the team. So it's really trying to band together to understand those pieces from a business perspective. And then from an engineering perspective, it's everything from what types of tooling, what types of standards, what types of services do you use in the cloud, and what's going to help move you forward from an architecture perspective, from a provisioning perspective. All those types of things. Reuse especially is quite a big one, because you don't really want people solving for the same problems over and over again. You want to be able to reuse the institutional knowledge, let's call it, from an engineering perspective. So you want to take those two types of capabilities, and they're quite different. If we're honest, oftentimes the financial side or the business side and the IT side have been separate. They've been disparate. So it's really trying to marry those two together, leveraging the skill sets to actually move the organization, again, to catalyze and accelerate the organization for its use of cloud. So we've got a few different roles that I've mentioned already that fundamentally, and they might, in a small organization, they might be one person, they might be two people. But in large organizations, we have actual functions across the business. So it's trying to pull those functions together into a team to go and drive this agenda forward.
So, Darryl, what I'm hearing from you, and it comes back to the people again, this whole
Yeah.
process is very much a people-led engagement, right? And something that
Mm.
can leverage existing talent in different
Yes.
organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you look at repurposing, let's call it, I think that's a fair enough term. Repurposing the team that you have to actually go on this type of cloud journey, that can make a lot of sense. So there's no real risk. And I hope the people who are part of organizations that are going on cloud journeys, I hope they're not seeing the risk of, them potentially being out of a job, etc., those kinds of things. I think the
Mm.
willingness and the capability and the ease actually to get up to speed. Yes, it's a learning curve, but to get up to speed on cloud is very, very possible. And it's a journey we're seeing a lot of our customers taking. The call out I would make here is to leverage your provider, whether that's AWS, Azure, GCP, whoever it is. Um, Leverage your provider, leverage their partner type network to accelerate that journey. Because there'll be a lot of unknowns. It's one of those things you don't know what you don't know. So
Yeah.
leverage a partner, leverage the provider, leverage whatever mechanism that you can to accelerate that journey. Get everything in place, because that's only going to speed that journey up. So, as an example, at Synthesis, we work actively with our customers to help them to establish some form of capability so that they can run. So, it's that whole walking before you can learn to run, before you can fundamentally learn to fly, let's call it, with cloud.
Yeah.
And it really is that accelerated journey that you should look at taking, because ultimately you do want to run it on your own with the people that you have. And I think it's a really exciting journey for the guys as well, especially the technology guys. I've seen very many, even in the enterprise or startup space, seen very many employees from a technical perspective who are very keen to get on the journey. And surprising, I think everyone is very much surprised how quickly they get up to speed and how quickly they start to see those benefits. Again, comes back to leveraging the people that you have.
Darryl, is there perhaps a customer example that you could use, that you could just
Mm.
talk us through to try and conceptualize what you're talking about?
Sure. So I think I'm not going to dig into the industries or any of that, but from a large enterprise, let's call it a large enterprise perspective, guys who are going onto the journey,
Yeah.
they're taking that accelerated approach. They're testing it with an actual production use case, so something they want to provide to their customers. They're building out this whole CCE approach based on an actual working use case. And the one that I'm thinking of in particular now, they went for quite a big use case as well. They weren't looking for a small intranet type thing and how we can learn to use the cloud with something that's internal facing. They went all the way out to a real, quite challenging actually customer solution that was in the cloud.
Hmm.
And so for them, what we started with was an assessment just to understand where they are in their cloud journey, because I think that's quite fundamental. Like, where are you in terms of your people, in terms of your process, in terms of leveraging the benefits of cloud, and where, of course, do they want to be? And from our feedback as well, where are we seeing competitors in their space or other customers in their space in their cloud journey? So it's been this assessment type phase to understand that, understand where they want to be going, and understand that use case, because that's our test bed. That's to prove the value that they can get out of cloud in a very practical way. So what we did was we assessed against a few things: the operational capability of the business, the readiness for cloud in the business, that application itself from an assessment perspective. And we took all of those kind of findings, and then we worked towards establishing the CCE in parallel to deliver the actual business outcomes and requirements for that application. And that proved very successful. We actually were able to stand up a lot of the capability in the customer to
Hmm.
be able to run, to be able to find their way and make things work within the cloud space. And then we worked with them actively to create the roadmap to operate the business better, operate the workload, etc., and get those findings back. Because it comes back to the return on investment that you can actually start to
Absolutely.
quantify a lot better in terms of how you can utilize the cloud. And like I mentioned before, it's quite abstract, it's quite nebulous if you talk about agility. But if you have a good view of what those metrics are, you can actually start to track them and expose them and give them back to business so they can see what that return looks like. So in that particular customer example, I think very positive in terms of what we could learn. And of course, those learnings just help to accelerate and create momentum in the business so they can create more business agility for themselves, actually.
So, I mean, let's talk about those metrics and the return on
Sure.
investment, because I think that's really key. What
Yeah.
kind of metrics do you have around that return of investment for business that
Mm.
has, you establish a center of excellence, for example? Is
Yeah.
there a metric that can accurately measure this?
There's actually quite a few. So as an example, in this particular case, and what we're seeing from, there's various evidence of this in studies and IDC reports, etc. Those types of things. The providers release their own stats as well. But some of the key ones that we've seen is a simple one: less unplanned downtime, because we're leveraging the resilience of a provider. A lot of out the box tooling and configuration that we can use, not expending the horsepower. So let's tie that back to productivity. Instead of a guy spending 10 hours to operate an environment, he's now spending negligible amount because we've spent the upfront time codifying the system to actually be self-healing. So you've got things like less unplanned downtime in terms of leveraging the capability of the platform. You've got the staff productivity that can be quantified in hours in a week, multiple hours in a week, that can be freed up, and then those resources be used for better business outcome rather than spending time administering, operating, etc. The boring stuff. Let's be honest, the things that should be automated, machines should be doing.
Yeah.
That they can now be done with the cloud, which means lower cost of operation because you don't need to spend so much time with individuals operating systems. You can have the cloud operating the system. The other side is because you've got that freedom now for guys to actually be leveraged. Because let's be honest, all our customers have 100% commitment from their staff. But
Yeah.
are they leveraging 100% of the horsepower of their staff is a very different question.
Mm.
And because we're able to leverage that horsepower in different ways, so literally those hours being repurposed to create business value, you can deliver more features. So that's a simple outcome that comes off the back of that as well. We're freeing up time so guys can actually focus on the meaty stuff that creates business value, creates business momentum. And then what we're seeing is all that investment, whether it's ramping up for the skills or the implementation or solving for a bespoke use case over time, when you start to weigh it up, you get significant return in terms of how that pays back. And I think cloud is one of those platforms and technology changes or cultural changes, let's call it, where you can actually quantify a lot of the metrics just mentioned, but also over time, those accelerate as well.
Yeah.
And a CCUE, coming back to a CCUE, it's a good way to actually create that standardization and tracking and maturity in the business to actually explain that going forward.
Jeez, Darryl, absolutely fascinating. You know, Darryl, you've been in the business for a while, so you really
Yeah.
understand cloud. Have you like noticed or seen anything like wow and significantly different to where we
Mm.
were and where most organizations were already on their cloud journey pre-COVID, right? So everybody was at
Mm.
some point somewhere in the cloud, and I guess
Yeah.
with COVID and this remote
Mm.
working and organizations having to do things
Mm.
differently, everybody's had to accelerate this process. What have
Yeah.
we learned about the cloud and
Mm.
where we are now versus where we were before COVID-19? I know it's a tough one because we're still
Yeah.
learning a lot about it, but have you seen anything significant that you've said, aha, that's quite interesting and unexpected?
I think what we've all learned, to your point, is that we weren't using cloud enough. Our journeys were not ambitious enough to leverage the cloud more. Because if we're honest, let's take a simple cloud example: the remote working, having having the access to the tooling and the process in place for us all to jump onto, say, like a remote desktop type setup to actually do business, to integrate, or services, things like Teams, etc., or Zoom, or whatever you want to use from a collaboration perspective, maybe weren't as mature around the thinking or accelerated around the thinking. And COVID, like you've mentioned, just created significant, was a massive catalyst for us being able to do that. And then if we turn our attention to the customer side of it, realizing that cloud actually created a lot of the scale that we needed to shift to a business or to customers that were leveraging a lot more online marketplace type functionality or SaaS or product use cases. As an example, banks obviously being very much impacted by that. Guys who could just walk into the bank and get the services done are now looking at an application to be like, can I do this on the app? Do you have the features available for me online? Because COVID has negated the ability for me to actually be able to walk into a store or to a branch, sorry, just freely or as freely as we did before. The same we've seen in retail. Never mind the ability to do it, but the fact that you don't want to do it. You actually, from a from a safety perspective, you kind of want to avoid these big open spaces that are highly populated, a lot of traffic, etc. And you want to be able to do the stuff from the comfort of your home. So I think the key learning for us was, did we leverage, was the journey, was the strategy for cloud, um, correct and timed and prioritized correctly, because I think post-COVID, we saw a lot of rejigging in terms of the priority to get more services cloud-oriented, even if that meant re-architecting them or standing up new ones. I think that's where cloud's really good. Greenfield build of new capability. And what we learned was that there was a lot of reprioritization. There was a lot of redirection of the budgets to get more into cloud, to create that scale, to create that service capability, to do more of the fail-fast experimentation, to get the service out to customers, because it really did fast forward digitization for the customers that we're working with.
Exciting times, Darryl. I love the way you've put that particular one. Darryl Govender, the head of cloud services at Synthesis. Thank you so much for joining us at the Cloud Conference 2021.
Thank you, Aki.